So welcome to this episode of the Radix Nutrition Podcast. This week we're lucky to have an interview with Luke Taylor. Luke has spent the last 10 years honing and delivering his innovative, tailored 4-pillar model through his long-standing commercial business, Taylor Health and Performance. The comprehensive model bridges the gap between the latest scientific discoveries and the commercial applications of advanced holistic health practices, serving the health and human optimization market. Luke has worked with many international high performance, and today he's here with us to explain his journey and the future as he sees it. So welcome, Luke. Thank you for being here. And
I'm just going to say, absolutely, thanks for having me.
So it's a real pleasure. We've met you a few years ago, and we've been a big fan of yours over the years, and really looking forward to learn a little bit more about your background and where you see the future going, and introducing our audience to you so that they may benefit from your unique knowledge. So I thought, just to begin, what if you start by just telling us about where your passion and interest in your area of expertise came from?
Yeah, I guess it really came from my own personal experience, as for I guess most people in the health industry generally dealing with my own personal struggles and wanting to untap my true potential. So for me, it's just the continuous curiosity of trying to unlock what I'm designed here for.
Perfect. And what age did that begin?
When I was 4 years old.
Tell us about that.
So when I was 4 years old, I was diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos. So we'll say EDS, just kind of keep it easy. So what that is a flexibility disorder. So what that means is I'm ligamentously mobile. So my joints can get into weird positions, but what that means is the muscle bellies as a result are extremely tight.
Okay.
So all my muscle bellies are extremely tight, which means I'm extremely injury prone. But with my joints being able to get into really random ranges of motion means when I injure myself, I generally injure myself pretty good.
Oh, no.
So there's a combination of the overuse, or if I do a really good job, it's kind of caused a lot of pain. Struggling with that from 4 years old, I was told that I will be potentially wheelchair bound as an adult if I wasn't active and didn't do 60 minutes of stretching a day. So from an early age, I had a lot of discipline because I didn't want to be wheelchair bound.
Wow. And you obviously throughout your childhood, you were a pretty serious athlete.
Yeah, and that was kind of built somewhat from a necessity because I was, had to kind of move, but also came from very much a rugby household. So rugby was a natural line of passage, and that was where I was identified with EDS because I was running around the field like a grandpa at 4 years old, like a little shuffle. So that led me down the whole route. Before I got diagnosed with it, I went to podiatrists, went to all of these different kind of specialists, and eventually got diagnosed with that. So yeah, rugby was my life from about 4 to 21, and obviously not the best choice of sport when you're extremely injury prone.
Yeah, I bet possibly the worst.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely in the top echelon to that for sure.
Wow. And then you led into another sport.
Yeah, so that kind of stemmed from when I finished up in rugby. When I was about 21, I pretty much had a horrible rugby season. I was running. I was captain, so I was playing 80 minutes a game, and throughout that season, I sprained both ankles so many times, created bone spurs, had overuse knee injuries as a result, left SIJ, so left lower back, separated both shoulders multiple times, dislocated elbow, and broke both wrists. That was just in one season. So at the end of that season, I was left pretty battered and bruised, and at the time, told classic rugby mentality of just toughen up and push on through. And I've obviously, with all my injury history, I have quite a high pain threshold, so I could push through it, and did what I was told and had some anti-inflammatories and suppressed it, and went to a strapping clinic and strapped myself pretty much head to toe every game. But yeah, at the end of that season, I was pretty much left battered and bruised and couldn't even walk. I couldn't even run, sorry. But even walking was an issue, really, to be honest. So that led me down a journey of about 3 years, going to see every single specialist, trying to get it sorted, and pretty much told me I'll never run again. And I said, screw that. And at this point, I was studying sport and exercise science. So I dove into the literature to identify it myself because no one else was giving me answers, and they just said for me to take up swimming or some low-impact sport. But for me, running at that time was my mental health. So yeah, I had to, again, dive into literature, figure out what was going on. And for me, that's where the kind of the 4-pillar model that you mentioned earlier kind of stemmed from. So I was treating people, I was kind of a rehab specialist at this point. That was my avenue because obviously I'd rehabbed myself so many times. I could sympathise with every injury that people were dealing with. I knew all the movements that we should be doing to kind of rehab any kind of particular injury. But it wasn't until then when I started to cultivate that wasn't enough. There was a few pillars missing. So that's when I identified that mindset, lifestyle, nutrition, before movement. So it's really important that it's in that order because too often people will start with movement in mind and generally they just kind of cause more harm than good. And that's what I was doing in that 3-year period, was trying to solve it through movement. But until I actually stopped and looked at the research and identified I had chronic inflammation, I was adrenally screwed. So way too much stress hormones, so my cortisol was all out of whack. And yeah, I had mold toxicity as well. So my body was just chronically inflamed and stressed, and because of that, the injuries couldn't heal themselves. So I had to really take a step back and address the foundations. So obviously that was the mindset and the lifestyle and the nutrition.
I think you illustrate it perfectly in what you've just said, but one thing that's always really jumped off the page to us with you is that you really walk the talk, and everything that you speak about, you have first-hand experience, both in what it's like to, go through a journey or a life or a sporting career suffering from that, but you have a fairly powerful understanding of how best to resolve that from perhaps such a tricky journey as an athlete.
Yeah.
I think, it just is really impressive to me how deep your knowledge goes in those areas. So, where to begin, I guess. But
well, before we jump to that, should we talk about so pretty much how I proved that point that the 4-pillar philosophy might be a good place to go to next, just before we kind of move on. So pretty much after that 3 years of being told never be able to run again, I got to the point of running again after addressing the foundations. And as soon as my first run, I remember this run very vividly. And at the time I was like, I'm back. This is good. But I knew at the same time I couldn't just go back to where I was and had to slowly build up. But that's where I set the goal. And because to answer your question before, I went into other sporting endeavours, and that's when I decided to do Ironman. I wasn't just going to run again. I wanted to prove this philosophy by doing an Ironman.
Yeah, you chose an easy event to get back into.
Oh, exactly. Start small, right?
Yeah, wow. And how was that?
Oh, it was an amazing experience because the curiosity had been there for my whole life, because I love to kind of push the limits, right? And to me, I see Ironman as the sport which embodies that, both mentally and physically. And having to schedule your life around that is...
I guess, Luke, just for those that aren't totally aware, just talk us through an Ironman event.
Good point.
How hard it is and the length, because I've never obviously done an Ironman, but harder than a lot of people are aware of. So just talk us through that. Okay,
so you start with a 4K swim, followed by a 180k bike, followed by a marathon. So I could have gone out and just done a 10k run and celebrated, which I did do those, right, in the build up towards it. But I really wanted to kind of prove it by doing a marathon first and foremost, but not just a marathon after a 4k bike and 180k. 4k swim and 180k bike. Yeah.
And where did you do your Ironman?
At Topol.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Okay, and what was your build up to that like, when managing this injury rehabilitation?
Yeah, so once I kind of addressed the foundations and treated the cause, not the symptoms, I was obviously able to kind of keep building up. But obviously we're still suffering with EDS or ehlers-Danlos. I had to be very... recovery is an important part for me, and it always will be an important part for me, because that's just how I keep myself going. So I had to really take a different approach to Ironman, and what I wanted to prove with Ironman as well is, because I deal with so many time-poor clients, is how can we strip back and come back to first principles and do an Ironman in a minimal viable way. So how can I get the most with the least, I guess. So really focusing on efficiency. So I began to really hack it. Instead of doing 20 to 30 hours of training a week, I physically couldn't do that because I was running a business. So how could I do that? So I was like, okay, I believe I should be able to do this by looking at what I had to achieve was 10 to 12 hours max a week. So I became really critical and efficient on how I trained. And then the recovery was the most important part around that, which I think is often overlooked. So prioritizing sleep, nutrition, having a great mindset, these kind of foundational pillars.
It's great to hear you say that. When I was a cyclist, later in my career, you start off typically in endurance sport, and I think cycling, the traditional side of it's chronically bad for just focusing on volume. Yep. I followed that for years, and I didn't need to. Before cycling, I was a swimmer where there's a reasonably good emphasis on quality, although that does have a darker side just around quantity as well. But later in my cycling career, just a realisation, and it was made popular by some of Team Sky and Dave Brailsford's, they're really focusing on quality, but I think almost everyone doesn't get that. Like, if you focus on volume, it is inevitable that it will end in burnout, and you're always constrained by what your body, the workload it can take, and that your recovery opportunity where the fundamental adaptation takes place, right? So it sounds like you had this realization, in the presence of quite a forced and heavy constraint on what you could do. But I think not a lot of athletes realize that, and they don't realize that you just have this limited opportunity to get as much out of it as possible, right? And obviously, as we all progress and other commitments come on board, we realize how short we are on time. But just a bigger and bigger emphasis on quality. Yeah. And obviously quality in your training stimulus, and then also in your recovery opportunity, right? And,
absolutely.
That's one thing. If I could go back to when I was a kid, I think I was reasonably aware throughout my career at times, but I'd just try harder on that. And that, there are a lot of bike rides 6-7 hours, and everyone would take pride on the clock. And you look back and you sort of look back at training file, especially in hindsight, and you realise that was mostly junk.
You're in the grey zone.
Yeah, it's just you're just working your way towards saddle sores and just general fatigue. And then, there's just not a great deal of adaptation around that. And I remember hearing of some athletes that didn't have an off-season, not through the volume aspect, but just that they focused on quality and recovery and staying away from chronic fatigue so much that they didn't need this. Cycling, might have a 4-month off season, which a lot
we go on binge and
and a lot of it, because it's the only way you can recover from 6-7 months of just chronic overtraining. Which for me resulted in my body. I just, my health started to fail at the end of my cycling career. But yeah, you've had this same realization.
Oh, massively.
And I think if you look at a lot of elite athletes who are essentially teenagers and in their early 20s, where the body is just very resilient and will take a lot of workload and will rebound. It's kind of sad to see that in young athletes, because that it's only the lucky few that are going to be able to tolerate and take that into a professional career throughout their 20s and maybe 30s. But for the rest of us, you just need that really strong focus on basically your, as you call it, your pillars or your foundational health, right? What does it take to be really healthy, and allow your body and mind to perform at their best? Yeah,
and then I think the other thing on that as well is the precision nature of that. Everybody's different. So I know from my genetics and through all the kind of assessments and bio data I assess, I know that my inflammation markers are terrible. So I'm going to recover slower than others.
How do you measure that?
So that's just genetics. Or through genetics, you can do it through organic acids as well, understanding, the Krebs cycle. So I know for me, I am predisposed to a slower recovery. And obviously with EDS as well, that stacked on top of that is obviously that's genetics as well. So layering upon that, I know I have to address it differently. And I think too often people see, the athletes that the old school athlete that just has been able to keep going and going, but they don't actually think about them as an individual. They think about them as the epitome of what they need to do. And they may just have the perfect genetics that allows them to bounce back super quick.
I think also a lot of people, particularly, when you have that sort of situation where you're looking up to the famous athlete on the front page of a magazine and you don't actually know them, you don't actually know what their health is like on the back end of that, right? And it's not particularly healthy.
Yep, it's the skinny fat, right? Yeah, so too often people are like incredibly unhealthy on the inside, but because they've got a six pack and they're winning a few races every now and then, they look amazing. But what they don't know is the slippery slope's about to come, and it's going to kick them in the ass on the way out.
I had I won't put any names to it. I was riding with I think it was 5 or 6 World Tour riders once in Melbourne, and it was during the Bay Crit series at the start of the year, and we're on a recovery ride, and I was lucky to join with them, and I must have been 19. And one of them, who was probably one of the top 5 names in Pro Tour cycling at the time, front pack Tour de France, had to rush off to an interview. And I remember them joking around, what would you say? And it was just, you just tell them the usual, tell them we've been doing 40 hours a week, tell them we've been doing, and they hadn't.
Yeah.
Because why would you, right?
Yeah.
It's not smart. And I just remember suddenly realizing that what you read in a magazine around what these guys say they're doing, actually wasn't. Well, they're not doing 40, 50 hours on the bike a week.
Well, and you can look at the research for that as well. So we know with pro athletes, they apply the 80-20 principle without even knowing it half the time.
Yeah.
So 20% is the intensity, and the 80% is generally, level, like really low level intensity. So it's like an easy ride. And I think also the other discrepancy is when we join rides with the people that are a bit fitter than us, we end up being in zone 3, zone 4, where they're just in zone 2. It's like there's a complete disparity because they're going faster. We think they're working harder, but actually that's for them is their level.
And I think it's so easy when you train to have that sort of revision to just being in the middle of your zones, right?
Yeah.
And so you're neither recovering nor actually giving your body a clear training
horrible grey
stimulus.
zone.
Yeah, and I've done years of that, and I think that the other issue is that a lot of athletes, their passion lies in training or racing, and that recovery is taken for granted. And it's not looked up to in the same way. But the more you get into it, and the more successful athletes you're around, you realise that actually what they really focus on is what they do off the pitch or off the court or off the bike and their recovery routine. So what I'm really interested to hear about, if you could just talk through your pillars. I'm just keen to touch a little bit on where the realisations for each one came from and what maybe you do about it. And then just to start talking about where most people actually are in terms of that.
Yeah, okay. So it was cultivated over the last 10, 11 years of running tailored health and performance. So there's no one point in time where they all came from. I created language as I went along. So many times I've been talking about things but not have the language necessarily to impart that. But over time I've created that. So I guess the whole mindset, lifestyle, and nutrition came at the same time, and that was when I was in that 3-year period where I just got told I'd never run again. And I think it was the realization of chronic inflammation was the leading cause, which is the leading cause for a lot of people. Autoimmunity is chronic inflammation. And that's what was leading to my gut issues, why I couldn't eat certain foods. It was what was leading to, my brain inflammation and my brain fog that I was getting, and also inflammation through mold toxicity. So, the real foundation for me was inflammation, and that's what I had to address first and foremost. And to address inflammation, there's a number of ways you can do it. And that really comes down to the mindset, lifestyle, and nutrition predominantly, but also not overdoing movement. So understanding where to, recover, because inflammation is a stress. And we can only, if you think about a cup, you can only have so much in that cup. And if that cup is overflowing, your body's not recovering, so therefore you're just continually breaking yourself down. So what I had to start doing was there was no one area that had to be focused on. We had to focus on everything. So very much taking the holistic approach and addressing everything at the same time. But again, knowing how important habit change is, you can't do everything at once. So there has to be a prioritization.
We often try and do everything at once, so right?
Oh, we do, especially us athletes, right? I find with the athletes and the executives that I work with, we're what I define as a high performer. So we generally try to do everything at once. And I am the biggest culprit for this. And I've caught myself time and time again and always have to strip myself back to first principles and realize, okay, this is not sustainable. Because I think it's an important time to actually talk about habit change for it. Because so often we have this big motivation, it's the first of the year. So we're New Year's resolution, let's just change everything. And the reason why these don't sustain is because we're not stacking on existing habits. We're just chucking everything in at once and we're living this optimal life, but motivation dwindles about 3 to 4 weeks down the line, and then all of a sudden you can't maintain it because it's just so beyond what you should be doing. So when I was kind of applying the addressing these kind of principles for myself, I continually would go too far, pull myself back, go too far, pull myself back, as I kind of learned to kind of find my boundaries, I guess. But for me, I came to identify mindset as being number one, because the mindset was the element where I was overdoing it. Yeah. Because my mindset was wrong, I was pushing myself too hard. So that's why mindset is the first in the 4-pillar philosophy. So I guess, I addressed mindset first. And through doing that, to give you some examples of some things I did, I obviously had to regulate my hypothalamus pituitary axis, so HPA axis, which is your stress axis. Yeah. So you've probably heard of adrenal fatigue. That's the more clinical name of it, I guess. So that was just essentially out of whack. So I had to balance that back up. So the way I did that was integrating things like meditation, really cultivating a really healthy mindset around life.
How did you become aware of it?
How to become aware of it? So testing, really. So diagnostic testing. I did subjective questionnaires of symptom-based, first and foremost, and eventually went down the line of doing, Dutch testing, so doing, cortisol panels and, yeah.
So again, this journey of self-awareness, realization, first-hand experience.
Yeah, it's the kind of... I think the subjective and the quantitative is really important to be married together, because too often you're either in one camp or the other camp. So what we try to do at Tailored is bring the two together, so that they're synergistical, so they augment your life, essentially. And I find it in particular with the high performers, they like the data. So bringing that data to that subjective is really helpful, because okay, it's not me just making it up in my head. There's actually some data to state this. So it really helps with making that change. That's kind of how I identified that I needed to address everything, really. So each thing had a different thing. So for example, with mold toxicity, it was a mycotoxin panel to help confirm that. Gut health was, at the time, was an IgG and IgA assessment where I identified, gluten, dairy, sesame, and all that. Didn't agree with me. Again, there's a lot of contradiction in IgG and IgA, so there's something we do need to be aware of, but there is no gold standard in really assessing intolerances at this point in time as well, especially back when I did this 8 years ago. But at the time, that was probably the best you could do, and it kind of got me into it and, gave me the motivation to kind of start addressing those things. And since then, I've obviously, and actually alongside that, I did stool sampling to kind of understand, what's my microbiome, what's going on. So those are the kind of things I did to identify these were the causes.
Okay. And then your next pillar?
Yes, the next pillar was lifestyle. This was probably one of the more critical ones, because I really believe in the environment. You need to set yourself up for success, because if your environment doesn't set you up for success, you're just going to be continually falling back. So that kind of came down to surrounding myself with the right people first and foremost. Obviously stripping the mold out. So being in Hamilton, a very prevalent location for mold, because it's so damp. So obviously making sure I kept my room super clear from any kind of mold. It was mostly from my childhood. It wasn't actually currently, but keeping on top of that, making sure that there was nothing there to aggravate me, and always moving to newer houses. I don't like old houses. As soon as I come into a damp environment, I can sense it. Now
I had interesting realisation. When I was an athlete, I used to occasionally use a altitude tent.
Yep.
Which was HEPA filtered.
Yeah.
And even if I didn't use it at altitude, it was phenomenal. I used to suffer, or I still suffer from allergies.
Yeah.
And the difference between sleeping in a HEPA filtered air environment for me was I didn't used to drink alcohol at all, but I've barely ever had hangovers. But it was a incredible eye opener for me. I didn't realise how much there was to gain by cleaning the air in my environment.
Oh, it's massive.
And a couple of the first time, it took me a long time to figure out what it was. Because I was looking at an altitude tent and I was thinking, this is a stressor, right?
Yeah.
So it should be damaging or negatively impacting my sleep quality. And yet I walk out of that environment feeling incredible, but it goes away after about 15 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I realised it was my allergies and having HEPA filtered air and coming out into what was an otherwise clean house, but again, pollen and stress, it would just be like a subtle but definitely detectable fog that would just descend on my body and my mind.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate to have that realisation. But it's pretty incredible what we go through in our environments, and you're not always familiar with how you will feel if you remove those stresses.
Yeah, and that sleep was a big issue for me in my lifestyle as well. So that's why I started to create my sleep sanctuary, right? Like, really, like, you can pretty much think of being awake as brain damage and asleep as brain repair.
Yeah.
And it's really important to understand the differences there. And it's not necessarily meaning being awake is terrible, like, we need to live and stuff, but your brain is deteriorating throughout the day. And we need to have those deep stages of restorative sleep to recover. So, for example, in our deep sleep.
And adapt, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at, this is actually where the excitement happens, right? This is where we move on as a this is where, your learnings, settle in. Your physical adaptations take place. So yeah, sleep I think is a huge deal. But sorry, go on.
Yeah, so I was just going to pretty much break into that really. So, in your deep sleep, your kind of earlier stage of the night. So we have predominantly most of our deep sleep in the late, just be kind of around that midnight, like from about 10:30 onwards to the early hours of the morning. And then we'll go into a REM later in the night, so more towards the early hours of the morning. So for me, it's between like predominantly a 5 a.m. to 6:30. That's my predominant bout of REM. But in our deep stage, this is our delta wave stage. So this is when we're in a really deep sleep where we're kind of recovering. So this is where our glymphatic system works. So if we're thinking about a system what is, like if you're familiar with the lymphatic system, that is, our blood. That's what pumps and flushes the toxins through our blood system. But then we've got our glymphatic system, which is very much the same thing. It's the garbage clearing system for our brain.
Yeah.
And if we're not getting that deep sleep, so say we're drinking alcohol or we're not getting to bed till the early hours of the morning, we're not getting that deep restorative sleep. So therefore your glymphatic system's not working. What you're getting is a buildup of tau proteins and beta amyloids. And these are precursors to neurodegenerative diseases. So that's obviously going to have a massive impact on you long term. But this is where the brain healing is occurring. So if you're not healing, you're just continually deteriorating. So I'm obviously passionate about longevity, and I don't want Alzheimer's and dementia, especially post my concussion 2 years ago. I'm even more critical of that these days. And at the time when I was going through this, I was still studying. So I was previously doing all-nighters, dosed up on caffeine, trying to get it all in. But what I started to identify was that wasn't healthy. So I created a sleep sanctuary, prioritized sleep, because I wasn't getting the memory consolidation. I wasn't getting the emotional reset of the REM sleep. So I got those things, and then obviously my productivity increased, my brain fog cleared up.
So what is your sleep sanctuary?
So that's obviously evolved over the years.
Yeah.
So the number of things. So trying to keep airflow, as you talked about. So we're going to get negative ions through fresh airflow. So always keeping a window cracked, even in winter, just to kind of keep the airflow going is going to be important. Blacking out, that's number one. We want to get all light out of our sleep environment. What else do I do? So I have a number of technologies I use to augment it as well. So I'll talk about the foundations first, then I'll kind of talk what I kind of layer upon that. Because
I think for that it's key as well. Most of the benefit, you have to get the foundations in place.
Yes. Yeah.
So we start there.
Okay. Yeah. Exactly. I 100% agree, because I don't believe you should be augmenting your life, because this is again what I see with athletes and like high performers in general. They want to just go for the biggest biohack.
The real gains are in getting the basics right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that starts with circadian rhythm. So my evening routine starts in my morning. So getting out, getting 10 minutes of direct sunlight, and getting moving, getting grounding. So getting out onto nature. So I'm lucky enough to live on a farm. So every morning I wake up, walk around the farm barefoot, and making sure I'm getting as much unprotected sun as possible. So no sunglasses, as much skin exposure as possible, and just absorbing that sun. And that's a big part. Obviously getting some movement in there as well. Yeah. But then throughout the day, you want to also, in the afternoon is the other time where we set our circadian rhythm. So we want to, as the sun's going down, also expose ourselves to the sun. So that's obviously not my sleep environment, but these are important things I want to kind of mention to kind of underpin the importance of setting that system up. And then coming into the evening hours, we want to be reducing that kind of blue light, because obviously that's not natural. If we're looking from an evolutionary perspective, we want to be stripping away any kind of blue light. That's the same frequency as the sun. So if the sun's gone down and you're exposing yourself to blue light, that's going to be quite damaging. So we need to strip that back as much as possible, and try to allow the body to unwind. So I use the 3-2-1 principle. So 3 hours before bed, I have my last meal. 2 hours before bed, I stop working, and last hour is no technology. And that's kind of how, because I think often people think sleep is just off switch. But it's not an off switch, so we need to really down regulate the system. And then for me, I obviously there's some really cool techniques which you can do, because what really regulates sleep is your temperature. So hacking the temperature is quite an interesting thing you can start to play around with. So having a hot shower, or for us, we have a spa every night. That kind of increases our temperature to a high point, which you think, because to get into a deep restorative sleep, we need to drop by 1 to 2 degrees. Yes. But you think having a hot shower or a hot spa is going to be like the worst thing for you. But actually what that does is it increases the blood to your peripherals, which reduces your core body temperature, which allows you to kind of get that deep restorative sleep. So having that hot shower or that hot bath or spa is a great way to kind of help down regulate you, even though you think you're doing the opposite to what you should be doing.
And what temperature is your room when you sleep?
So that I don't do any AC or anything like that, because obviously AC can be quite, it's not fresh air. Yeah. But what I do have, this is kind of coming to the technology side of it. Yeah. So
I can tell you're itching to get there.
So that's where I kind of layer upon technology. So I've got like an ULA. So an ULA is a temperature controlled mattress, mattress protector. Yeah. So something that sits on top of my mattress that has water that channels through it. So I can regulate the temperature through that. So depending on what time of year, depends on the temperature that I have, but I actually schedule it throughout the night to help enhance my sleep. So depending on what stage I'm trying to achieve at the time, depends on the temperature that I have.
Okay, something I didn't know I needed, I now immediately want.
It's amazing. Yeah, summertime it keeps you cool, winter it keeps you warm as well. So, and it's quite interesting when we start to look into the kind of science behind that and how our body cools and heats, because too often people are doing it the wrong way. Yeah. With like they put an ice pack on their stomach or around the back of their neck, but you're not going to cool off that way. So there's interesting things we can start to look into.
I think interesting for me would be I find my sleep pretty heavily impacted by the room temperature, and obviously that's a seasonal shift as well.
Yep.
And so, going back to maybe that sort of performance mindset, when you have a variable that has an impact on your output, you just try and stabilise it around an ideal. But it is frustrating to have a warm room and find that wrecks a night's sleep.
Yeah, you definitely want a colder room. So ideally we want to be around that 17 to 21 degrees. Yeah. So we always want to strive for that wherever possible. And there's a number of ways you can do that. And the reason we want a colder room, even in winter, like we still want that cold room, is because that's how your body cools off. So inside the blankets and stuff, you can have as many blankets as you need to kind of keep you warm. But it's really important to have that cold room, because that's how your body can cool off to kind of regulate your temperature. Yeah. So for those that don't have an ULA or an 8 sleep or something similar device, you can just by chucking a limb out, so a hand, a foot. These have
just some surface area.
Well, yeah, they have so no hair follicles in these areas, which actually allows this absorption. So they're a really amazing way just to kind of, it's the body's regulation. So there's some cool technologies coming out at the moment, which like you can hold onto a hand, like from a recovery perspective and a sleep perspective. So there's boxers now using these devices, and it goes onto one hand, which cools their whole body down. So in between rounds, they're recovering at a higher level, which allows them to not get fatigued. So it's interesting from a recovery perspective, but also from a sleep perspective as well. So,
okay, so the fundamentals we've covered. You want a quiet, a dark room.
Yep.
You want to be away from technology.
Yep.
You have a 3-2-1 principle that I think for a lot of people would help reinforce things that they already know, but it's so easy to stray away from those general principles for a good night's sleep.
Absolutely.
And then we've touched a little bit on the technology, but is there anything else you would use for tracking or giving feedback into sleep quality?
So I use a number of different devices. So like I'm on the edge, right? So I currently have, I've tested the world's greatest biotechnologies and for the last 2 years. But just been playing around with the best I can get my hands on. So I've done everything from sleeping with headbands. So I've had the Muse, I've had the Dream 3. So Muse is kind of like a clinical grade, then the Dream 3, is like a consumer grade, and then Dream 3 is like a clinical grade device, EEGs, and then I've also got a BrainCo coming in, so got a new one just on the way at the moment. But those three, for example, are not really great from a usability experience. I'm not going to be able to get any of my clients to necessarily wear those unless they're a clinical case.
But you're learning, you're experimenting.
Oh, absolutely. So I'm in the geeky phase, and it probably makes a bit more sense as we kind of go through this conversation and talk more about what my next steps are. But then I've probably had the Aura the longest. So I love the Aura. Because what I love about it the most is it's invasive. Unlike the headbands, it's comfortable. You don't even notice you're wearing it. And when I'm trying to guide clients, for example, I find it's the most powerful device because it's a device that they'll wear. Yeah. Because I think when we're looking at devices, the biggest thing that is often forgotten is we think about the data, but we forget about the usability and the behavioural psychology elements around that. So what we try to focus on is what will people wear and utilise, because if we're not getting any data, it doesn't matter how good the device is. And I've found the Aura to probably be really powerful for that. From a clinical grade, we have Biostrap is another device I use, and I've used quite frequently. They've got a new device coming out soon, which I'm really excited for. And then I've got the Withings as well. So like at the moment, I'm kind of comparing these three because they're all very similar devices, from activity through to recovery through to sleep. So these are the ones I'm testing at the moment, but I've also, like the Whoop, what else have I done? Just all sorts of devices really. So
I guess it's just a side question. How do you find when you look at the rise of wearable technology, and we've got some very mainstream brands, Google, Samsung, and Apple moving into it with their devices and health kits. Yep. How do you compare that environment to one of specialist brands?
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing. So for me, what I do is I look at the research. So I want to see what has the most validity in the technology. So what is the closest to the gold standard? So for example, there was a good study came out recently, probably March. They had the Aura against the kind of gold standard ECG and testing its ability of accuracy. And it was within 0.2%. So 0.02. 0.02, sorry. So super accurate in comparative to the gold standard. So for me, it's a very low invasive product, which is going to get more accurate kind of sleep because you don't actually change the way you sleep. Like for example, when I wear the headbands, I find I'm uncomfortable, so I'm not having a good night's sleep. Or if I went to a sleep clinic and I was hooked up to a big machine, that's not
normal.
That's not normal. Where this doesn't change. So
we used to. A little bit of a tangent, but I was when I started my cycling career, I was lucky to get an SRM at a pretty early age, and I remember people saying, it's not as maybe they're not as accurate as a lab-based ergon. Or why would you invest so much in an SRM when you can just go to a lab and be told your numbers? But the reason was it was close enough and enabled you to gather data on a daily basis. and view a far larger data set. And it was interesting on that. I was 16, 15 when I was fortunate enough to get an SRM. A lot of naysayers, and now they're absolutely everywhere.
Absolutely. It's the dynamic versus the static, right? Like sitting on an erg versus being on the road is completely different. You got all the
100%.
Yeah. So 100%. With it comes to that lifestyle element, right? Like it makes sense to me, but there's often the zealots, I guess, that want.
And I think for me, which I know is a big passion for you, it's not just capturing data or storing it's how to interpret it towards that goal. So we can get to that. I guess I know you're itching to talk about that. But hey, we're on the sleep side.
Yep.
So we'll just continue going through what you've learned to be the foundations of optimal performance. But was it nutrition that was next?
Yes, nutrition was next. Absolutely. From that standpoint, just addressing my gut health first and foremost. So a lot of inflammation. Obviously, I've identified that gluten and dairy were terrible for me, along with a number of other foods. And so since then, for the last 8 years, I guess I haven't had either of those foods. Yeah. I have them every now and then to kind of see how my response goes, or it's an accident. Sometimes the food just sneaks in. But for me, I just don't enjoy having them. I don't think anyone should have gluten. I used to be on the belief that some people can handle gluten, but now
I think for me, I've had arguments over the years with gluten and a lot of mainstream nutritionists. That the trick for me, it's not whether some people can tolerate gluten or not. It's the fact that I can't see any correlation between an inherently natural and healthy food and gluten.
Yeah, 100% agree.
Yeah.
And then on top of that as well, just because you can handle a little bit than others doesn't mean you're not getting an immune response.
No.
So there's still that inflammation boost, which is like, for me,
it's just below threshold for most people, right? It's just not detectable.
Yeah,
and it's not optimal.
And that could be because their body literacy is not there. They don't understand their own body.
Yeah.
So they don't understand what's going on. Like for me, I was chronically bloated for 21 years with no understanding of it.
Yeah.
I was a high level rugby player, playing all the time, and was super fit, doing really well. But I was chronically bloated and brain fog and all these kind of symptoms that you just don't know until you kind of strip it back and you remove it, and you're like, oh, this is what a healthy body should feel like. And then once I do that, people ask me like, do you not miss gluten and dairy? I'm like, hell no. Like the way I feel right now, I'm not going back.
I had a realization when I was a kid training, and I can't remember why I dropped gluten from my diet, but I realized at a young age that I could just wreck my next day by having gluten.
Yep.
And what was the point?
Yeah, absolutely.
I could do something at 6 p.m. the day before that would just wreck my 8 a.m. training session the next day. And it took me a while to get the perception of that, but when you realise it, the trade-off was pretty easy to make. I just don't need to do that. And it's the same. I have it now around sleep, that it's so easy to give away something in an evening at the cost of destroying your productivity and happiness the next day, which is most evening tasks are pretty low value, right? You just need to be relaxing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then for Radix, at least, you're stepping into a very, very fast-paced environment where you want to give your best, and it's just not a trade-off that I would take lightly or want to make anymore. But I think you're also speaking to just the value of the athlete-coach relationship, right? Where you, again, now through your experiences and understanding, it took you 21 years, but you can bring that to someone a lot faster, which is, of course, the benefit of working with someone such as yourself with that experience.
Yep.
But for me, I know a lot of awareness has come to this term, marginal gains now, which is really only defining what has always been there, right? That if we go through and optimize a number of things, we can come out in aggregate with an easier high performance environment. But I just never was able to see a correlation. Why would you really want gluten? If you're chasing nutrient density, you won't find gluten much in the equation.
Yep.
At least it's been it for us, but I think a lot of people just don't yet have that perception.
Yeah. It's slowly changing, I think. People are starting to become aware of it, but it's just so slow.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's, hey, interesting. So carry on.
Yeah, so obviously gut health's number one. You know, we know 1/3 of all our small molecules are created in our gut. So that's kind of where it starts. But it's also understanding that it's a two-way pathway between the brain and the gut as well. So really doing everything we can to kind of support that. Obviously reducing inflammation as much as possible. So I'm not just going for gluten and dairy that are inflammatory for me. Just on dairy as well, I do think some people can handle dairy. It really depends on your lineage to where you kind of come from. But for me, it doesn't agree with me at all. So that's why I removed that. Gluten, on the other hand, I don't think anyone should have. So this is just personally what works for me, as I remove dairy, because it can be nutrient dense if you can handle it. But for me, it's just too much inflammation. So what I'm trying to do is strip back everything. What causes inflammation? How can I minimize that? So again, looking at first principles, what causes inflammation in the gut? Over the time, I've learned more and more things, and I've gone down the rabbit holes of so many different areas. For example, fibre is what we've been thought to be as the key thing that we need to have. But since I've kind of dived further and further into the research, fibre is actually not the solution. Fibre is the problem in many cases. So it's trying to really understand what the literature is saying and just kind of tease these things out, because I've been on both sides of it. Like in early days of nutrition, I was prescribing people to have 7 meals a day, like all these little snacks, every 2 hours have something to eat. But my whole philosophy has changed like that, and I think everyone should be keeping their philosophies very malleable, because if you stay so rigid, you're not going to keep up with the education and the literature that's coming out, because what we're seeing is nutrition science is so new, and it's so biased, as we know from we look at the food pyramid, for example, and we know how corrupt that is.
I was just going to say, at times it's found to be totally wrong.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think again, you just sorry before you carry on, but it's just that adherence towards simple best practices, right?
Absolutely.
Carry on.
Yeah, so to not go into any kind of rabbit holes, but just for those that aren't aware of the food pyramid and the issues around that, just look at Ansel Keys, his 7-continent study, which was really 21, but he just stripped the other 14 out because they weren't really aligned with what he was wanting to kind of get with that perfect alignment. I've got lots of blogs on that. But generally, nutrition science has been built around a lot of lies because of the sugar industry and all these money makers. So what we really need to do is come back to first principles, look at the research, but also who is creating the research, and understanding is it valid and what's the methodology behind it. And I've been doing that over and over throughout these years, and kind of gone down a number of rabbit holes, and it's just identifying what works, but what works especially for me. So having that precision approach, understanding my unique biochemistry, and how I can enhance that.
I think we could have a whole separate conversation around nutrition.
Oh, absolutely.
Most of what is out there is to be watched with a very wary eye.
Yeah, absolutely.
And finding your way back to executing well on the pillars or foundations of nutrition is very hard.
Yep.
And that's where Radix began. So if you want to, it's extremely valuable. It's pretty complicated. And basically you just want to bring to market or give people the tools that they need to optimize their own health through their own self-identified or identified with the like of an expert such as yourself. The nutritional tools that enable them to be at their best, however they want, wherever they want. And we found it pretty interesting picking our way through the food industry.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I won't. Yeah, less said, the better. But it's pretty interesting. And again, as we were talking about before the podcast, for us, it's a technical challenge. If you want to find your way back to the ideal, it's not so easy, and we found that no one's done it yet.
Yep, absolutely.
And it can exist around supplements or parts that can make up a small minority of someone's dietary intake. And that's cool, but it's not where most of the gains are going to come from. So if we would try and shift the 80% of someone's diet and not optimize the 20% to go against a sort of Pareto principle. But that's why the meal range for us gives us the ability to have a really significant impact on someone's diet and shift in a beneficial direction. And we've got a lot there as we better understand our role in that. and optimize a meal to provide a higher and higher quality and quantity input in a beneficial direction for someone. But nutrition's a pretty big one, but although we've specialized in it, nutrition can't make up for an unhealthy lifestyle or any of the other things that you've mentioned. It sure as hell can't turn around. It can only help.
Yeah.
And I think we're not in a situation where we'd ever want to say nutrition can solve everything, because it's just not true. There's nothing you can eat, there's nothing you can do to fix a terrible night's sleep.
Yeah.
And if you stack those back to back, and that's the norm, there's nothing that's going to make up for you not addressing that.
Yeah. I think it's also coming back to the first principles again, right? Like, so often people, like I said before, they want the latest biohack or technology to enhance themselves. So like the high performers will generally take all the supplements in the world but have a terrible diet. I'm like, why? Let's start with the foundation of diet first. Let's get the basics sorted first. Yeah. But then beyond that, like, take it even more simple. People don't chew their food anymore. Yeah. So simply chew your food, drink water, and be mindful when you're eating it, because too often people will be sitting on their phone, eating, like distracted. So you're already setting yourself up into that sympathetic nervous system, which is, your fight or flight. So you're not actually in your parasympathetic, you rest and digest, emphasize the digest.
Yeah, no, the on switch is just continuously on.
Oh,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think it's so important for people to be present with their food, and, chewing.
Yeah, and I think one realization I had when I was a kid training is that when you get amongst really great performers or athletes, whether it be athletes or whether it be anywhere else, again, it's the fundamentals, but their diet is comprised of really fresh, really high quality natural foods, and they don't need to supplement a tremendous amount. And it's never to say that you can't gain by supplementing. Yeah. It is just that you can't look past the value of the fundamentals and make up for it by supplements. Yeah.
That's the build-up, right? You've got to start somewhere, and you start with the foundations.
Yeah.
Then you layer on the 1%ers.
Yeah, and I find it interesting, particularly if it maybe just as a sort of analogy, when you're a kid and you get into a training environment, you'll have a coach that will tell you the value of warming up, the value of focusing on quality in your main sets or main part of the workout, and then warming down and doing these basics. It's the first thing you learn. Yeah. And it's the first thing that most athletes then immediately dismiss. Yep. And then it ends up being the most valuable.
Because it's not cool or sexy, right? Like,
not at all. And yet, when you get older, you see why people value it. Or maybe it's too late and people don't. So there's a lot of athletes that will drop out in their late teens and 20s just because they're burnt out. But there's a reason why Roger Federer's 40 and still going.
Yeah, absolutely.
So nutrition, we could talk for a long time. If there's anything else on that, please explain, or we could just go on to the last part. Which
there's so much. Like I could again go down many rabbit holes. It just depends how far we want to go down. But yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to go into on that?
I think one thing that I like what you guys are doing, so would be looking at oils, because I think there's a lot of misconception around oils. Too many people are just taking terrible oils. So it's the seed-based oils, the linoleic acid, the horrible inflammatory-based oils, which we don't want. We obviously want the balance between omega-3 and omega-6. Yeah. And you can think of your omega-3 as your kind of your linoleic acid, your seed, vegetable oils, and then you've got your omega-3, which is your kind of, you're coming into your kind of olive oil and all those sort of, so you can get the balance in that way. Yeah. But what I find too many packaged foods in particular, you're talking chips, we're talking every kind of packaged food, not just healthy food, it's poison. But even more in the substitute foods. Yeah. So for example, the gluten-free, the vegan, they're just pumping these full of these horrible oils. But what I like about what you guys are doing is you're actually stripping it back and bring it back to good quality oils. I think that's something that people need to address, and also address how to prepare the oils as well. So not oxidizing the oils. So we know the fish oil market is corrupt. There was a target done on that, I don't know how many years ago now, but they identified, I think, about 3 on the market that were actually good. They actually said what they were. Because what happens is in the shipping, if they're not in a dark container, they're exposed to sunlight, therefore they oxidize, which therefore makes them rancid, which makes them the opposite of what you want. That's inflammatory versus anti-inflammatory. So what you guys are doing in the way of, not oxidizing your oils, and the process of what you're doing there, I think definitely needs to be talked about.
I could talk for days on that, and fascinating. So I mean, for the Radix side, what we've been doing is drawing a much clearer focus onto what we want to do with our fatty acid profiles across all of our core products. So if I can't go into too much of it, but we've recently shifted to New Zealand sourced, very fresh, extra virgin, cold pressed olive oil. And we've done that for a number of reasons. And, one can be traceability. We can go and eyeball a supplier, know that we're happy with them, see what they're doing. We're after the polyphenol content. And there are so many health ramifications or benefits to be gained from that, but freshness and just some of those basic principles, it's fascinating, it causes us problems. So if you get a really high polyphenol olive oil, it's pretty hardcore.
Yeah.
And we've had to learn how to deal with that because we want to use it. But from a formulation side, for a lot of companies, the easiest thing is to use an old oxidized oil because if the polyphenol content drops out, tastes of nothing, you can add it into anything, and then it's very cheap.
Yeah.
But it's not good. So we've gotten a lot clearer on our design. We've gotten a lot clearer on our supply chain, and then it's pushed us to understand how best to integrate that into our products. Protect it from oxygen, so whether or not we can keep it under a nitrogen blanket right the way throughout production, which we're pretty close to getting to now.
Yeah.
But it for us has been the focus on getting really, really clear on what we want to do, why we want to do it, and then how best to make that true through technology application.
Yeah, and I think for people back at home is obviously this is really important from this product as well, but the simple things that they can add into at home is using the right oil for the right temperature. As well. So often people I see using coconut oil on a frying pan. Worst thing you can do, you can oxidize it. It's got a low smoke point. You got to treat it like that. So it goes on top of uncooked stuff with very low smoke point. So there's understanding each oil and the smoke point that is associated with it and storing them well, So getting the extra virgin cold pressed oil, even though it is double the price, there's a reason it's double the price because it's actually there to support you, not to break you down, and making sure you store it right. If you to never buy a bottle, especially olive oil of a clear bottle, it has to be dark. It has to be a dark bottle and it needs to be stored in a dark place. It's just these simple principles that we need to kind of bring back, and I think it's not talked about enough, so that's why I thought I'd better bring that up because it's just an easy thing to...
There's a lot that we could do. We've been working with Athens University a little to better understand the technicalities behind olive oil, what it can bring, and some of the nutritional compounds within that can only be found in that. And it's, again, it goes back to some of the basics here, that if you want to benefit from the really potent beneficial side effects of some of these ingredients that only exist when it's fresh, you've got to question how it's getting to the other side of the world. It's not so easy, and the cheapest thing is to just not tell people that you're doing it the wrong way. And for us, it's been really fascinating to start dealing with some of the some of the producers in New Zealand, and to get a way better handle on that. But I think even on the biofeedback side, at some point, for those who are interested in this, they'll be able to see or measure the benefit of moving towards these things. And it will just come out of the darkness a little bit. I think some of the what has been intangible. Two different brands, same price, different supply chain. Very different qualities.
Absolutely.
Hey, we could talk for a long time. We're Radix for us is about focusing on nutritional quality, nutrient quality, diversity, bringing together all of these somewhat hard to understand but definitely hard to execute in a busy daily life pieces, and make it simpler, make the right thing simpler than doing the wrong thing. and being able to give an ultra high quality meal to someone, and they're able to prepare it in 60 seconds. We can get you an outstandingly healthy meal faster than most people can make it halfway through the queue at Subway.
Yeah.
And you kind of need to do that to shift people. If you look at the mass scale, you've got people that really, really care about diet and will invest a huge amount of effort into making sure it's done well. But I think you almost, for a lot of people, they don't know, they don't realise. But we see you have a kind of a moral obligation to try and put forwards to make the right solution outcompete the bad one.
Yep.
And yeah, well, it's what we're trying to do. But hey, I won't go on about nutrition because I'll talk about it too much. But the last pillar, mobility and movement and exercise, and which, as you said at the start, is where most people are drawn to.
Yeah, it's I'm seeing it time and time again at the moment. It's the Get Fit Summer Challenge. Get your six pack for summer, or it's the pursuit of
shallow stuff.
The shallow stuff, yeah. Like the things that actually, is a six pack healthy? Like these are the questions we need to be asking. We're in pursuit of this six pack because that's the ideal, but is that actually healthy for you to have? Some people may be, and it will be, but for many others, it's not. It's at the cost of your energy, your libido, your sleep quality. It's just not worth it in my eyes. And I think people need to start really addressing what is health to them.
Yeah.
Is it just looking good, or is it actually feeling good? And I'm just seeing every kind of gym at the moment providing these challenges.
Healthspan, right?
Yeah, Healthspan, exactly.
Which I think is a beautiful term that not enough people know. But
exactly.
There is a long tail to a lot of the detrimental habits that people have on a daily basis, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you could talk a little bit about.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So just to understand Healthspan, lifespan. Lifespan is your age, so pretty much how long you can live for, which is all great. But if you're hooked up to a machine, not having a good quality of life doesn't sound like a life I want to have. So it's about, like you said, Healthspan, which is that quality of life. So living to beyond 100 with quality. And that's where the Healthspan comes in. And these quick fix approaches, it's these plasters. Let's treat the symptoms. Let's treat what you would love to see, let's just get you as a poster. But you're not going to be able to sustain that. Like, you might get the six pack by summer, but are you going to be able to keep that? No. And will you end up in a worse place where you started? Yep. So we're trying to flip that on the head at the moment. So to all the other 10-week challenges out there at Tailored, we're producing a 10-week challenge. But to flip that on the head and actually apply the 4-pillar philosophies, the mindset, the lifestyle, nutrition, and the movement, because we're giving them the terminology they like, right? The 10-week challenge. But really what we're going to be preaching, well, not preaching, sorry, that's the wrong word, advocating through that is to slow down, because long-term health is slow health. So really teaching people to move away from these quick fixes and actually address what is the foundational issue, So instead of just putting a plaster on the symptom, let's address the foundation and make sure you succeed long term. Because obviously at Tailored Health and Tailored Health and Performance and Tailored Technologies, my new business, we are solving Healthspan. Like that, we want to help people live longer, healthier lives.
And I think a key thing for a lot of people, or the realization comes that the beneficial behaviours or good habits compound, right? It
Absolutely.
may find its way into a community or a household through one member. But when that person understands what they need to be at their best and what they short term, long term, and then it spreads to the rest of the family.
Yep.
If done well, it's one of the best investments that people can make, especially for a parent, perhaps, when you're raising a young family who would never know.
Yeah. Oh, you absolutely nailed it. And that's exactly what we do at Tailored. It's what I call the ripple effect.
Yeah.
Because where we differ again is we provide education.
Yeah.
We tell you why we do what we do. We don't just say, do this. We're not going to command you to do something. It's like, this is what will help you. Here's the principles and why we do this. Here's, if you want to know the depth of the physiology and the biochemistry of why we say this is it. Because everyone, you've got to meet them at where they're at, right? So we address people where they're at and then give them the education and tools and strategies so they're empowered.
That's where the value of it comes from, right? And that's
absolutely.
If you want to affect long-term change.
Yeah,
and then habits.
And that's where the ripple effect comes in as well, right? Like you said, that one person comes back home and then they see their son struggling or something, or their husband or partner, whatever it may be, and then they help them, then they help their friends, and then extended family.
It's pretty powerful.
And it's, because I think too often we're disconnected from what is actually true because of what the media tells us. Yep. So that's what we're trying to do.
I think it's just awareness for most people.
Yeah.
Like the intent would be there if they only knew.
Yeah.
I think probably, if you look in a sport environment, you have the athlete-coach relationship, or you have a parent-child relationship. But I think if the awareness can just come to it, and then everything else is easy and clearly mapped out. And I think we're going to go through a fantastic technology shift, which perhaps brings us on to the next point here. Better than perhaps I could have ever planned to do so. But in a lot of areas that previously have just existed around, you just have to appreciate you're doing the right things and maybe have a growing self-awareness to begin to pick up these subtle shifts in the right direction. We're going to enter an age here of biofeedback, to give you immediate feedback or gratification or reward for going in the right direction, right? So I'm aware that you're working on something.
Yep.
But I'm also deeply interested to get your take on where you think the future of this is going to lie, because this is obviously going to be a global shift and global awareness here. So just riff on that and say whatever you'd like to say.
Absolutely. So this kind of comes into, like you alluded to, what I'm kind of working on now. So our new business, Tailored Technologies, which is codename Project Otto. This again is a very exclusive program in which we're doing a 2-year multivariate biodata project to deeply understand human beings, because what we believe is going to happen is this augmentation of technology and humans to help us live a longer, healthier, more enhanced life. Because what we're trying to do is augment it in a way where health is no longer a concern. If you have your health, you no longer need to think about, do I need to go plant-based or do I need to go carnivore? There's no longer these polarizing opinions of this is what I should do, this is what I should do. But research looks great on both sides. What do I do? Yeah. Instead, we can tell you what precisionally you need through technology. Obviously there's a bit of knitted in here for what we're going to do with Tailored Technologies, but with what we see the world going to as well. So if I just take a step back and say where the world is going to go to the combination of, like you said, biofeedback, really to enhance our body literacy. There's 2 ways it could go. It could go in a way where we're just reliant on data. That's not the world I want. I want the world where it's the combination of that data and that subjective. So you've got the quantitative and the qualitative. So we want to see the marriage of those two together. But also coupling upon that is that behavioural psychology. So a big part of what we're going to be doing is really focusing on how to nudge people in the right direction. And that's what I've learned over the last 10 years with running Tailored Health and Performance and what I'll be bringing into it. So that's that 4-pillar model. So stacking that on top of the subjective and the biofeedback to really empower change. So this is really the next evolution for us, is to get the data really refined to the individual. So what we can do is to kind of break it back down to where we're going. I'm trying to not give away too much, but over the next 2 years we're doing a multivariate biodata project which we're going to deeply understand you as a human being. So what that involves is 2 years where we're kitting you out with the world's best wearable technologies to understand the biofeedback, but also getting biofeedback through clinical diagnostics. So you'll be doing an array of the best clinical diagnostics every checkpoint throughout the 2 years. So what we're getting is the chronic feedback from the checkpoint data plus with the live data of your wearables. And no one's doing this. This is an absolute world first, because anything that's been done somewhat similar to this has been done in a clinical basis. So looking at clinical populations such as, maybe suffering from Alzheimer's or dementia, but no one's really done a study of this breadth with healthy populations. And I say healthy in a colloquial term because some people will not be healthy because...
but one of health optimization in the absence of any significant disease.
Exactly, yeah. So that's when I'm saying healthy populations, more from a study kind of perspective. So they wouldn't be considered clinical. And And what we're going to be doing is creating this world first data set, which will allow us to create a human digital twin, which will be, again, another world first. So imagine yourself in the digital space. What we'll be able to do is run hundreds, thousands of your lifetimes to identify what will work for you. Would plant-based work for you? Would carnivore work for you? Is supplement going to work for you? Or whatever it may be. It's going to be like the Google for your body. Essentially, you can ask it the question, what should I do? And it will give you the answer, because what it will know is it will know your unique physiology and biochemistry.
I can't express how interesting and impressed I am at that, and I'm sure you're in the right direction. And I think all of this data is going to come to surface, and it's the interpretation of that towards the beneficial goal where the real value is going to start sitting, right? So I just think we're probably on the precipice here of quite a significant change in this world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like there's so much changing that I don't think people are aware of yet. Like the technology's advancements are phenomenal. And what we're predicting, because essentially what Tailored Technologies is a 500-year vision, a 15-year business plan, and I've only just kind of alluded to the next 2 years.
Yeah.
But what we're predicting at least is massive technological advancements, which is going to help speed up this whole process. And I don't think people realize how soon it's coming.
I've been talking about that for quite a while, years, and not in quite the same way that you're talking about it here. But I don't find too many people you can talk about it with.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it frustrates me quite a lot. Yeah. And maybe a generational thing, but I think it's just awareness and mindset. It's obviously going to happen.
Yeah.
And it's going to be huge.
Yeah. And
for a lot of people, it's going to happen far faster than they know, and they're going to be taught things, or it's going to enable things that they just did not know existed.
Yep.
Whether it be a CGM coming with an upcoming Apple Watch, people, blood sugar goes from something that they everyone should have a perception of their blood sugar levels and how their body reacts, but most people don't. Most people don't know what blood sugar is.
Yeah, or what a CGM is, right? So maybe you should even describe.
Well, you can lead.
Okay, so CGM is obviously a really powerful technology, which has been in diabetes for I think 20 years now. I think it came out in like early 2000s. So it's been used for a long period of time, but only in clinical populations. No one's really using healthy populations. There's a few companies that are starting to do that. So you got Levels in America, who's kind of starting to help you get some body literacy around that. You got Super Sapiens in the more athlete side of it. But these are very early days. People aren't really utilizing these technologies, and that's one of the technologies that's part of our project, because it's so powerful, because you start to understand how each food responds to you uniquely, because we're all going to have different insulin responses, because it depends on how metabolically flexible you are. Yeah. If you have metabolic disease, that's going to obviously have a bigger part.
We were talking to someone a few weeks ago, and who I disagree with. Very nice person, disagree with them. They couldn't. CGMs have, as I understand it, been banned in a lot of professional sport. And then someone was saying, but there's no use for them in professional sport, because by the time a CGM can detect that your blood sugar is crashed, it may be too late. Whatever. Yeah. But zoom out, and let's say that you have an athlete over a longer time scale, and you have a training plan, and you're able to take that data and build it into a forecasted training plan. And you're able to look back over the prior 2 weeks and see that, maybe you did screw up that last training block. Yeah. By not fueling properly. But it's no longer a minute-by-minute feedback. It's the aggregation of that and interpreting it to improve the next several weeks. Yeah. And my mind baffles me, and even with we're looking at diabetes and looking at CGM and other technology, and you look over maybe we're all quite simple people, right? Certain set of habits. I drive to work every day. I have a certain set of training sessions, certain set of other habits. So if you can take data and overlay that over a fairly stable routine, that you can just see a point where your Apple Watch or something similar is going to say, hey, on Wednesdays you normally do this, and you normally get that wrong.
Yep.
So Wednesday morning do this, Tuesday do that, and the predictive element is going to be far more powerful and perhaps far simpler.
Yep.
Than most people realise. We think that we lead these very intricate lives where every day is different, but it's probably not.
Oh, it's really not, and that's one of our key hypotheses. Over the technologies. We've got three. So there's a minimal viable truth.
Yeah.
So what we're looking for is what is the minimal viable truth of data sets that we can extrapolate out to deeply understand a human being and create the human scaffold in the digital space so we can run the simulations. The second one is that we can create a digital twin, which we know we can. So it's been done in infrastructure, it's been done in animals, but it hasn't been done in humans. So we believe we can utilize that technology in humans. And then the third hypothesis is behavioral psychology. Yeah. Because I think this is the most critical part of our whole project is we're going to be kitting people out with a whole bunch of technology, so we need to make it simple and actionable. Yeah. So we're really focusing on the user experience, and we're looking at actually funding PhDs to help support this, because if we can't, like I said earlier, if we can't help people make the right choices, like it doesn't matter how good the data is, you're not going to do it. So therefore we're flawed. So we're spending a lot of time and effort into understanding that behavior. But you described exactly what we're trying to create, which is that benevolent health companion that is with you on your journey with you. So for example, if you, it will link in with your calendar, and we could scrape back and identify that there is a whole bunch of strategic meetings coming up, and we know that you had a really big training weekend and you're just absolutely physiologically tapped.
People don't know this is coming, and it's going to be so powerful, and most of the things that we all get wrong are the simple things. Yeah,
exactly. So we'll just give them the actual strategies to implement to help support you. So maybe it's as simple as, let's push these out a week, or let's look at how we can nutritionally support these. Can we reduce inflammation? Can we heighten cognitive load? Maybe add some exogenous ketones or some ashwagandha to kind of help balance out the stress response, or
even it's going to turn into the relationship with the coach or the advisor or the whoever that most of us are not lucky enough to have.
Yep.
And virtually no one has with them at the time that they need it, right? Yep. It's going to be the friendly nudge on the wrist that you've got an early start tomorrow morning, you should go to bed nearly an hour later. Or the diabetic that, through that data set and the interpretation of, we're able to put in place a improved routine that they may not be able to get through their traditional healthcare provider.
Yep.
And it's just not that granular.
Yeah, exactly. And the medical system, it just is not built to solve these issues, right?
No,
the medical system
never has been.
Yeah, it's been to deal with chronic issues.
Yeah.
So if you've got an acute injury or acute kind of sickness, so you're kind of really clinical grade, that's what they're designed there for. They're not designed for these lifestyle approaches. And people need it right now because we're so disconnected with our evolution. We are just damaging ourselves time and time out.
I don't know how it's going to go, but you can just see that these sort of personal health kits or data sets, some point in the future, will be so much more powerful than any one-to-one relationships that we have throughout our lives, right?
Yeah.
You go to a great doctor, but you're lucky enough to see them 3 or 4 times, but they never know you that well.
Exactly.
And I think that's computation will be the only way to really get through that, I think. So I could ask 100 questions, and I won't go too deep, but I guess we could sign off. Cool. And I just say thank you so much, and it's a real pleasure to have a chance to talk to you, to know more about what you're doing. We're a big believer in what you do, and we'll put some links in the show notes for people to try and find more about your services.
Cool.
But thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Cool. No, thank you.